ask you questions for people who actually do watch these videos, believe it or not, to learn more about you. So we'll begin with a brief biography. Tell us a bit about how you got here, where you grew up, what you do for a living, that kind of thing, why you're running for this office. We'll ask you, Senator, to go first since you're the incumbent, and for you to describe, to state the number of the district so people,
Okay.
we know you're SD 15, but people watching will not. When you introduce yourself, state your party affiliation, because we know it, but others will not. And
Okay.
if you, since we have new districts, please describe the geographical boundaries of the district.
Did you want me to describe where I currently represent and then?
Yeah.
So currently and then where the change?
Yeah, because there's a bit of a change.
So do you want me to do the same thing even though she just did it?
Just say, no, you say who you are and that you're a Republican candidate and so on, but we'll just have one person describe the district
Okay.
is enough. Because there are a lot of these and, the districts are changing. So, we ready, Brian?
Yeah.
Okay, let's get started. So we're here for the Senate District 15 endorsement interview. We'll start with the incumbent, Senator Solomon. Please introduce yourself, tell us about the district, and give us a brief bio.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I am Janine Solomon. I am the state senator for Senate District 15, which currently includes Forest Grove, Cornelius, a little bit of Banks, the town of North Plains, Hillsborough, and Aloha Beaverton. In 2023, that will change, and it will change due to redistricting, which will be Forest Grove, Cornelius, Hillsborough, and the Rock Creek area. So I am
So for those of us who are geographically challenged, tell me how it shifted. I get the towns, but tell us which direction it shifted in and how it affected the voter registration.
I went a little less north, because I peaked up into North Plains and such, but that town grew 48% in 1 year.
Wow.
So that was quite a tipping point for the numbers in the district. And so then I just went a little bit more across. I was at one side of Cornelius Pass and 185th. I just went a little further north to take in the
And
Rock Creek area.
how did the redistricting change the voter registration?
I think it stayed relatively the same, pretty
Okay.
solidly.
So tell us about yourself, please.
So I am Janine Solomon. I am a lifelong Washington County resident. I grew up in Gales Creek. I lived in Forest Grove, graduated from Forest Grove High School, was even the school mascot at Forest Grove High School, go Vikings. And I have had the opportunity to serve this district now for 6 years. In that, and I'll tell you where I first started is a classroom volunteer, and then I was a school board member in Hillsborough for 8 years, board chair for 2 years, and then I became the state rep for 5 years, and then when Chuck Riley, when he retired at the last part of last year, I went through the appointment process and was selected to become the senator. So incredibly, honorable position. This is absolutely 100% about community to me. Having held 96 community conversations in my 6 years, it is what drives me. And so that is.
How do you make your living outside the legislature?
I work at a software company, Vernier Science Education. I just actually celebrated my 25th year with Vernier Science Education, and that I work part-time.
What do you do for them?
I work in their front office department.
Okay. All right. Carolina.
I'm Carolina Malmadal, and I'm currently running for Senate District 15 against Janine, and she indicated what the demographics of that area is. And I am a mother of 3 children and a grandmother. We have lived here in I have lived here in Washington County for 21 years. My husband, Chris Malmadal, was born and raised here in Washington County. And we currently have 2 businesses. One is Malmadal Plumbing, a plumbing company, and the other is M3 Luxury Restroom Rentals as well.
How many people does your plumbing company employ?
18 currently.
Wow. Okay. Is that more or less than you had before the pandemic?
That is right around the same amount as the prior to the pandemic. Now, 2008, we shrunk a lot after 2008. So we were much bigger. We had 36 employees. But with that turnaround, we said, no, we're not
Is
going to
it
get that big.
residential plumbing mostly?
Residential, we do some service. Also, that's a smaller amount of what we do on the plumbing side.
And what role do you play in the company?
I do all of our administration
Okay.
and HR.
All right, now I am dying to know about the luxury porta potty. Well, that's not what you would call it.
It's a luxury restroom, yes.
Luxury.
So
how many
essentially,
have you got?
we have two, and essentially they are just what you would see at events. So the granite countertops and the lovely floors for weddings, because most of us like to go potty
Yeah.
in pretty places.
How
So
much do those things cost? I've had the pleasure of being in one. I was amazed at how
they
much
vary. Yeah, they vary. So it depends on just what upgrades you're doing and what you're adding to them.
Do they weigh a lot? Like, how do you get them in?
You
Do
could
truck
tow them,
in, or-
yeah, you should have a truck, and you're gonna want that just because weight fluctuation with water and waste and all of that.
So is that a growing? You've got two of them. Are you going to grow that or?
Oh, I would love to, absolutely, yeah. Mhm. It has
And
the potential.
I'm sorry, I'm fascinated by that business. How often do you rent them out? Are they always busy or?
Well, they would be. I have not pushed that, and so we started that as a woman-owned business, and then me being an immigrant, it'll be minority-owned, and then I jumped into, this race. So that's kind of, I don't have the
Good.
bandwidth to do Momadal plumbing and all that that entails, and now take on all that M3 would entail if we were running full-time.
Okay.
So I've scaled that, and quite honestly, we're busy enough, not even, just by being on the internet and word of mouth
Yeah.
with wineries and events that go on.
So what kind of civic engagement have you had up to now?
So I've been very active volunteer-wise with, just my community and, Rotary. I was the president of Rotary. I'm a member of the Hillsborough Elks Foundation, and just been engaged with, attending meetings, interacting on the Washington County Chamber and the transportation and then public policy committees. So I've been engaged just in that way.
And what compelled you to run for office this year?
Well, what compelled me is that, as I indicated, I am the owner of a plumbing company, and in the course of the last year, we have been broken into. So the trailers have been broken into to the tune of $15,000 each time. And they come, they take all of the tools, and you're stripped of tools. We've also had our fuel lines cut. We've had ignitions taken out of vehicles. And so when that happens, it quite literally brings you to your knees, and we can't quite get out and get things going. So with that going on, I had spoken to the police officers, and I was like, what is going on? And it actually forced us to move our business to a different location that was more secure. So when I started looking into things, and I did bring for you these are what I call the dirty dozen. And these are legislative votes that Janine has taken. And when I started looking into my opponent's legislative votes, and you can start with 2017, that was really kind of where I looked at this and I went, okay, we have House Bill 2355, and this was prior to 110, where we disconnected sentencing for felony drugs to a misdemeanor and hard drugs, that's meth, heroin, fentanyl. And that led to people not now going in and getting any kind of rehab. But in addition to that, coupled with that, House Bill 3078 was passed. And what 3078 does is it reduces sentencing for identity theft and property crimes. And Carolina had been the victim of multiple property crimes, but also most small businesses and what our community deals with are property crimes and identity theft, because we have a lot of fraud that happens on credit cards. We have, I don't know, have any of you ever been victim of identity theft?
I've almost been bamboozled, but that was my fault.
So, let's just say it wasn't. And here now you're the victim of identity theft, or you've got your credit card taken, it's shut down, you're in Europe, somebody here, and as they often operate in rings. So why would anyone vote to reduce their sentencing? So when I started looking at that, then I went through the other bills, and as you move up through the course of 2019, we hit the juvenile sentencing bill with reduced sentencing for juveniles that Janine actually spoke on the floor for, I can't remember if it was 5 minutes, telling us how this would be good for Oregon. And I attached an article from 2020, and this article was written regarding juvenile sentencing. And this juvenile, I believe, was from McMinnville, and he slit the throat of his father's girlfriend, and he fatally beat her with baseball bats when she tried to call 911. You can read this. It is incredibly disturbing, and the judge in this said that he never would have done this sentencing if we had not had Measure 1008, which is extremely concerning given that we are all exposed to these people.
So let me interrupt you. So you decided to run because you believe that your opponent has been soft on crime.
I believe that my opponent has not only just been soft on crime. As I started looking into the crime, it became very clear that she no longer represents Washington County's voice for crime. But it was also the business votes that she's taken against business, the transportation tax that raised billions of dollars. Small businesses are paying that. I'm paying the fuel costs. I'm paying for the premiums. You then look at the corporate activity tax. We are paying that. This is not just on big corporations. I'm a business of 18 people. And that legislation impacts me. It impacts most businesses that we know. It's not just a large business tax. In addition to that, as I indicated, I'm a mother. I have children that are currently, I have one that graduated, she's in college, and then I have another one, he's a junior. And I think you know how our schools are failing. They're failing to educate our children. My son did not even know what I was doing when I decided to run. So you look at the legislative policy that has been voted on, and it really told me that we need another voice. We need another voice in our state, and we need another voice in Washington County.
Great, thank you. Senator Solomon, would you like to respond to any of those?
Oh, I have so much to respond on.
Okay.
That's quite a just an interesting talking points here. So I have been dealing with this type of rhetoric and these kind of mailers that are going out to our community members for some time. And I would like to say, first and foremost, to 1008, that was a bipartisan, that was a legacy.
Remind us
the
what
juvenile.
Okay, that was reduced, that was second.
It's a bipartisan bill.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's a bipartisan bill that worked with, it was a legacy bill of Senator Jackie Winters, and she led the charge, and she moved that through committee, as well as for saying that the judge would make a different call on that particular case. It's exactly what that bill does. That bill allows judges to take into effect what the circumstances were, what the safety risks are, what the crime was, what the trauma involved, the victims. It allows them to take all of that into consideration when making their judgment. It doesn't say, you did this, so this is your punishment. 25 years, 30 years. You're gonna go from OYA, or Oregon Youth Authority, which is approximately $110,000 a year to house someone there, and then have them go on to DOC and finish their sentence.
Right. So let's do this. You voted for that bill. You still support.
I did.
You still support it.
Yes.
Okay. Tell us Look, we know Senator Winters was involved, and she's no longer with us.
Right.
But let's focus on the concept behind the bill, the reduction in sentences for certain juvenile offenders. Why is it a good idea?
Well, I think because it takes into consideration the crime that was committed, the situation of the crime. It takes into consideration and puts more of the power into judgment into particular cases versus looking at everyone through the same lens of being able to do a certain amount of time.
So no more one-size-fits-all sentence.
Not a one-size-fits-all.
Okay.
And it's also looking at, we have to consider, and this was never my wheelhouse. This wasn't something that I had a lot of experience in, being a school board member. But what I did do is I went and visited McLaren, and I talked to a lot of the young men that were housed there. And the amount of work that our Oregon Youth Authority does with those that are incarcerated at OYA, and education and trauma-informed care, as well as working with our victim services and looking at how we can address the crime that was committed. I think that I fully stood behind Senator Winters in her life experience, in her own personal life experience, as to why she led this charge, and then visiting McLaren and talking with the young men there.
So I mean, because
Yeah.
it's a philosophical difference between the two of you. You've expressed a very clear opinion that you think she's too soft on crime. You would defend those votes today.
Can I also add
Sure.
that Particular Measure 11, it was built in to Measure 11 that said if you could get 2/3 of the vote of the legislature, you had the ability to overturn that. It wasn't a simple majority. It wasn't a matter of that. This was a bipartisan vote, and it was years in the making between Senator Winters and
But
such.
the reality is that it allows a person, a child, not necessarily a child, I think he was 17 years old, to slit the throat of his girlfriend's dad, kill her, bludgeon her, shoot another man in the face, the friend that is coming to help, and he would be released by the time he's 25. How many years is your life worth? So for whatever reason she decided to vote yes, there are instances where we have very extreme, murderous kids doing bad things. And is 6 years, 8 years enough? Can they be rehabilitated in that time? I think it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous, yes vote. It puts our community at risk. It puts everyone in the state at risk. And this is a prime example of why this isn't a good legislation.
I would also argue that when youth are in our OYA facility and receiving, because it is, when we look at Europe and look at the practices that Europe is doing, they look at the cost of incarceration, they look at how that needs to be handled within our system. We also need to make sure that when someone does their time at OYA and transfers to DOC, essentially a lot of the work that has been done actually goes backwards because they had such a concentrated effort put at OYA. So if you want to look at the effort of making sure that over 90% of the folks that are incarcerated will get out and be our neighbors. Our role is to go step in step right with victim services and the crime. And basically what this does is it looks at every situation through the lens of that situation and not looking at it through a cookie cutter situation.
So I don't want to get too bogged down in specific bills, but your opponent has also criticized your votes on the Student Success Act, also called the CAT tax.
Yeah.
And House Bill 2017, which
Yeah.
is a transportation measure, raised $5.3 billion in 2017.
Right.
So could you briefly discuss those two?
Certainly. First of all, I want to say that I am very proud to have support of our Oregon Washington County Chamber of Commerce. And our Washington County Chamber of Commerce knows how I vote just as
Can
just as
I
much.
make a comment on that?
Just a moment.
And so there is, so for the transportation budget bill, we needed to look at how taxes were collected was mostly through gas tax and through, we need to figure out how to support multimodal transportation, and how do we figure out when someone is an EV driver like myself, how do they pay into this system? So it was a system of I'm going to pay in due to registration fees and higher registration fees. And so I supported the transportation package, and I'll tell you my 8 years as a school board member, we cut $68 million from the budget. That wasn't on the people that are making that decision. That was due to state budget cuts, continuous. And that's Hillsborough, the 4th largest district in Oregon. So this particular bill, the Student Success Act, would actually then provide a stable line of funding so that school districts could address class size, could address mental health, could fully fund Measure 98, which is career technical education, and we know that's a game changer in education. But it actually allowed those opportunities for those investments, because if you continually cut a school budget, you cannot make the decision, you cannot make the investments needed to provide reductions in class sizes.
So your opponent in her campaign literature has observed that Oregon is in the middle of the pack in terms of education funding per capita, but toward the bottom, particularly in things like on-time graduation.
Yeah.
So you've been a school board member, you're a supporter of the CAT tax. Can you defend the performance of Oregon schools?
I'm also a supporter of Measure 98, and Measure 98 put investments in career technical education, put investments in on-time graduation, and 9th grade on track. So because statistics will show you that if a student is off track at 9th grade, that they need to be able to have extra resources. If you're able to get them back, you will see them graduate.
Well, I guess the question would be for small businesses like your opponent's plumbing business, or for large businesses like Tillamook Creamery, who's across the street. How do they know that that tax money that's raised by the Student Success Act is actually going to deliver results and not just more compensation for adults in the system?
So it's very specific as to where the buckets that it can be spent on. It can't be spent on salaries and such. It needs to be spent in certain areas, right? Whether that's class size, whether that's getting more adults in a classroom, whether that is mental health. Did you know that 80% of the visits of students that go to school-based health centers is mental health visits? And I'm supporting a bill next session that is going to increase our school-based health centers to address that. But specifically on the school-based, on the Student Success Act or Measure 98, it's making sure that those targeted investments can be made that can move the dial for graduation. And we're seeing it. We actually have seen it in Hillsborough. I can speak, in Great Banks High School, where I also represent, their graduation rate was somewhere around 91% pre-COVID. I visited their classrooms where they're doing CTE and career and technical education. And I'm partnering with our School to Career Center at Washington County Chamber, which provides internships for our businesses to allow them to partner with students in school and their workforce needs, and figuring out how they build their pipeline.
So so here's the thing. I don't think that anyone would disagree that we want our children to be funded, and they are. We have a very well-funded education system, and our children are failing. And while Janine is focused on all these other outlying, we're doing this, guess what? Our kids are not passing math, 20%, 29% for science. Shouldn't we be getting back to the core and base of what kids need to graduate so they can be successful and they can enter into these trade positions and be competitive on a global level? Not happening. And you taxing, these are going to go in these buckets? No. You're overtaxing, and everyone knows it. We are the 5th most expensive state in our nation.
Let's take the example
and our children are failing.
Let's take the example of our career technical.
And you also voted to not have standardized testing. Why would you do that?
To not pass standardized testing?
Yeah, right here. Yes. Because you voted to remove standardized essential skills requirement, SB 744, in 2021 for our children.
So I can tell
now-
you one thing, that as a mom of teachers, standardized testing is one way to evaluate students, and it is a one-size-fits-all. Standardized, it's how students. If you're able to test students in a different mode, if you're able to test students through formative, different assessments, you can actually get a more successful
But we're not
outcome.
succeeding. That's
Oh,
the point.
okay.
We
All
are
right.
not
I need to
succeeding.
take
We're
this-
failing in Oregon,
I need to take
48th
this
in the nation.
Different direction for a
I
second.
do want to point out one thing, though.
Let me ask you a quick,
Okay.
quick question. Who won the 2020 presidential election?
Joe Biden.
Okay. Where are you on the question of choice?
I'm a pro-choice candidate.
Okay.
Can I ask who she supports for governor, though? Because she's publicly supported.
What is that?
Christine Drazen.
Yes,
She's a Republican. She's a
I'm a
Republican.
Republican.
Right
Why
to life.
wouldn't I?
Yeah.
And I am a pro-choice candidate.
Okay.
I will always, my daughters deserve the right to choose. And you do not
Unrestricted?
get to tell me how I get to be a pro-choice candidate. Thank you, Janine.
Okay. Janine, in the 6 years that you've served in the legislature, can you
Yeah.
point to a vote you've taken or a position you've taken that has demonstrated your independence, where you haven't just voted with your party or gone along with what your presiding officer wanted you to do?
Multiple times.
Give us a good one.
One example is when I was a school board member, I was a former school board member, and I took a vote against allowing class size to be a mandatory part of bargaining for teachers. And that would, and I did so not because I do not agree that class size needs to be looked at, especially when we're looking at Measure 98 and how they can invest, but not every school district.
So you opposed your caucus, and your caucus was in support of that bill? I forgot.
They were.
Oh, I would like to point out that I think Willamette Weekly endorsed her on that, but then in 2021, she voted yes for it.
For Title I schools.
So this was 2021 class
For
size.
Title I schools.
And you voted yes. So
For
was it
Title
because
I
you got
schools.
some money maybe from the school unions or something?
What union do you think she got money from?
I thought she got it from the school union. It's in
Oh,
her
dear.
Worcester.
Okay, Janine, another example of your
In
independence.
21, I don't know if I did. Can I be honest with you on the first vote that I took? I lost their endorsement for several years on that.
But I suspect that's why you turned around and voted yes.
No,
But
because I am a mom of teacher. And it was centered on Title I schools. In Hillsborough, we made direct investments of money, of school state fund money, to address class size in our Title I schools. And guess what? We saw the difference.
Okay.
We saw the difference in our schools. So that's why I did it.
Okay. So you voted no initially because you were standing against your caucus. And then
No,
you
I
voted
voted
yes
no
years
initially.
later with your caucus. Okay, I understand.
This is
Okay.
like
Um,
bizarro world.
Okay, I would like to...
That's what I think when I look at your votes. Bizarro world.
Okay, all right, let's keep it civil. We would like to offer you both an opportunity to ask your opponent a question. Please make it a question, not a statement. Please make it a question that your opponent can answer. And please make it a question that you think will reveal something about your opponent that you would like us to know. We will give Christina, you the opportunity to ask your opponent a question first.
Who's Christina?
Okay. I'm sorry. I've been in too many of these today.
Okay,
I
so
apologize.
I think I would like to ask, I think a question that's very important to me is, Janine, why you voted against renters being able to take a $5,000 subtraction on their taxes for rent. And, I understand that you had indicated you needed more time or more legislation on it. So just would like to ask why you would vote against our renting
Do you
community.
have the bill written down by chance?
I know what bill she's referring to.
If you have the bill number, that's great. If you don't, I can look it up.
I believe I do. It was 3402, House Bill.
In what year?
I don't have the year, I'm
Okay,
sorry.
that's fine.
Oh, it might have been
19.
2019,
It was 19.
yes.
All right,
Same year as the-
So this bill would have allowed renters to do,
A tax subtraction of $5,000 from their rent, so they would not be subject to that tax.
This is actually I'm actually really pleased that you asked this, because this is part of a political kind of a maneuver of shenanigans, right? Someone would place a concept, a legislator, I think at this point it was Cedric Hayden, that made this concept that this would go through. They put it into Legislative Council, the concept is there, and then they do nothing with it. They let it sit in there and they don't work the bill at all. It died. So then that bill was then one day on the floor. Cedric Hayden, I believe it was, I could be wrong, but I do believe it was him, asked for that bill to come up for an immediate vote, which would completely bypass any public testimony.
so it had not gone
No.
through a committee.
No,
So he asked for an immediate floor vote.
asked for an immediate floor vote. That is called a bill pull.
It's done all the time as the minority. The Democrats have run our government for
Just let me know when I
12
could
Let her
years.
finish. Why did you vote against this bill?
I voted against the bill because procedurally you vote against those bills because they did not go through the public process. They did not go through public testimony. They did not go through the art of compromise and discussion with people who oppose the idea and people who support. Another absolute example of this is another mailer that has been sent out and a handwritten letter that talks about freezing the senior property tax. Again, I do think it was Cedric Hayden. Again, I do think it was 2019. This was placed, again, the concept was put in, nothing was done, the bill died, and then on the floor they asked for the vote to happen. They do this knowing that people take the vote no to say no, procedurally we can't do that because we need to figure out the impacts. And they talked a lot about, you know, the impacts and how this was important, but we actually never went through the legislative process to have hearings on it and discuss it. And so there again, that was another bill pull.
Okay.
So,
All right.
Very good concepts.
Would you like to ask your opponent a question?
it was, interestingly enough, I was originally going to ask if she knew what a bill pull was. So now I have to think about this a little bit. We had her answer. Well, can I reserve the right just to come back to this for a second?
We are just about out of time,
Okay.
so now or never.
Well, I guess I would ask you, if you had a bill concept, if there was something that you believed in, if you could tell me the process in which you would get that bill passed, and then tell me what happens after that bill is passed on the floor.
Well, the reality is that any bill concept that I have has to go through a collaboration process unless it's pulled to the floor, as you're saying. And then at that point, it would be yes, and then it moves on into what we need for the budget. If there are budgets that's going to need to process with that, then that's going to need to go, through the legislative process. On
So
that.
let's say it
However,
had a
you
budget. Did it
certainly
pass?
Could
And-
vote if it has a budget. Well, then it's
And then what
going
happens
to go
after?
back so that it can be made into law. And you
skip the
certainly
other thing.
could vote yes on something that sounds conceptually good, like a $5,000 subtraction for our poor renters that had.
But hold on a second. If you don't know what the cost of that deduction is, how could you responsibly vote for that
It's
bill?
not exactly
Well,
fiscally responsible.
You do understand that you would be giving a large tax break to
How
your
large?
renting
How does that get
population.
paid for?
Well,
How
you're
large
right
is the
now, we have
question?
more revenue than we've ever had because of all
But
the
if you
taxes.
don't know how much the bill is going to cost, how can you responsibly vote for it?
Well, could you not say with amendments to that bill or
No,
no?
but the whole point of the legislative process is you answer the hard questions before you vote on the bill. You don't just throw a bill out there and vote on it.
I think I would on that.
You would.
Yes,
Okay.
I would. I think
All right.
our community deserves that.
Okay. All right, well, we are out of time, unfortunately. We have another one of these in a very few minutes. So we have one fun question that we ask all candidates that is designed to illustrate.
This hasn't
your-
been fun yet?
It hasn't been fun yet? Your personality or something about you that didn't come up in this conversation. So the question this year, which we're
Okay.
asking of all candidates, not just you guys, is if the world were going to end tonight and you could only eat one thing before the world came to an end, what would that one thing be?
Is that me first?
You first.
So in Spain, my mother makes a tortilla. So a tortilla, it's not like your typical tortilla that you would eat, but you'll have them for tapas, and it's like onions and tomatoes, and then they put the eggs in and they cook them, and then you let it cool and you cut them up, and they're absolutely delicious. So if I had to have the last bite, that would be what it would
That would
be.
be a good last bite. Janine?
I'm celiac, so I would have to say I would find some glutinous meal, and the first thing I'm thinking of is a Helvetia burger, which I have not been able to have from the Helvetia Tavern because it is literally this big. It is
I've had one.
the best burger you'll have, and I, as a celiac, miss it terribly.
Yeah. Great. All right, well, thank you both very much. That was really good.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And I'm sorry I misspoke.
That's okay. You know, it's so funny.